my position on guns is pretty much clear. I don't like guns. I don't think that I'll ever own a gun. I don't think I have a right to tell anybody that they don't have the right to own a gun, though. Like, it's just as simple as that. We can kind of go into the nuance of why I believe that, but when it comes down to it, like, I don't know what your position is on guns, Masood, but I don't think that it's my right to be able to say you shouldn't be able to defend yourself in a way that you see fit.
Like, imagine if I'm, based on the same example that you said, which is, let's say I'm 5 feet tall, right? And then and I'm, I don't know, 140 pounds. Then, me versus you, I feel like I cannot take care of myself. I cannot defend myself. Let's say, I'm just asking. I'm not stating my opinion about. I'm not saying what I feel or what my stand is against or for guns. I'm just saying as an example, something that many people are actually concerned about is like if I'm walking home right from my work at maybe 11 p.m. or 1 a.m. or whatever, and then how can I be safe if I know that I am shorter and smaller than a lot of people, and especially like not only that, but also I know that criminals they all have so many different types of weapons with them. How am I supposed to defend myself?
Jujitsu. Did Eric tell you?
Jujitsu.
Did Eric tell you he's doing jujitsu now?
Is that why you're taking jujitsu, Eric?
I will say this, that if you get into a street fight with somebody, the last thing that you want to do is perform jujitsu on somebody. You need to be able to box. You need to be able to knock somebody out in one punch. You don't need to go into a situation where it's like, okay, I pulled him on top of me, and oh god, a piece of glass just went into my eye. I mean, if you go with gun advocates, they would definitely say that you should have the right to have that gun to protect yourself, defend yourself, that sort of thing. Now, I personally don't necessarily agree that I would choose that sort of thing, but once again, I am 6'3" and over 300 pounds, less pounds every day, hopefully. But just because that's not my preferred option doesn't mean that I have a right to tell you what your rights are. Like you were saying, rights are essentially given by God. People are endowed upon creation with inalienable rights that can't be taken away. And
Unless you have a green card, Masood, can you carry? Are you allowed to have guns in the United States?
I think I can as a permanent resident green card holder. I think I can do that. Not I don't even. You don't have to be a citizen to carry a gun, and depending on which state, like the same as everybody else, it depends if I can have it like concealed or just not concealed like out there. I don't know exactly. I think it depends on which state I'm in, but
yeah, it definitely does, because they're much stricter. Even it goes county by county. Like if you go in rural Illinois versus Cook County, which is more towards the city, there are completely different codes when it comes to like concealed carry, open carry, that sort of thing. But one thing that I think is the biggest and probably the thing that people won't move off of if they're pro Second Amendment, is that the Second Amendment is good on an individual basis, but truly what it's about is it's creating a populace that can't be tyrannized by their government. It was enacted in a time where we were fighting against a government that was trying to levy legislation against us without representation, and essentially saying we don't want to put people into a position where we hold so much power over them that they don't feel like they can even speak up against that sort of thing. So an armed populace is a populace that can push back against its government and say, no, this is tyranny, we won't stand for it. And that's what I really think that the greatest argument for the Second Amendment is that if people don't trust their government, and there's a lot of people that don't. According to favorability polls, there's better than half of people that say that Donald Trump, they don't trust. So it's like, why are those same people that feel like Trump is going to be a fascist potential dictator saying, oh, I want to take away the means by which I can legally defend myself against, unlawful actions taken by my government? Like, that just doesn't make sense.
that plus you cannot. So that actually kills the opportunity for the government to perform a military coup. So that's something else that the Second Amendment is going to protect the society from.
Mm-hmm.
But your point, you say you're against guns, but you don't feel like you don't think you should have the right to object the guns.
I don't even think that a large group of people should be able to legislate away rights. Like, I personally don't own a firearm that you know of, people that are out there.
That's a good point. I mean, the suspicion that somebody could be carrying a weapon could be, protective to women walking around in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
Is that woman carrying a gun? If she is, she's safer.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has somebody like you here all the time. If it was just me, and you know what? As far as the internet is concerned, I've got lots of guns under the bed, in the closet.
I said I, never said we.
But so the suspicion is kind of protective, but people are sick and tired of sending their kids to school and worrying if they're going to come home. That's the main issue.
Mm-hmm. So I think that there's,
And not just school, malls, public places. Who goes into a movie theater these days and doesn't wonder if somebody's going to come in and shoot up the whole theater? I think that every single time.
yeah, that's true, and that definitely gets down to the emotion of it. But I actually kind of want to swing this around to something that I was very curious, because I genuinely don't know this. Masood, how are things where you come from? Like, do you have the same right to carry a weapon on you in Tehran versus in Virginia?
No, not at all. So I actually look into that too, since I grew up there. I spent 25 years in that country, but I never ever. I mean, yeah, I did, but I was gonna say, like, never saw a gun in somebody's hand, or never noticed or heard that somebody had a gun around me, let alone myself. Other than the fact that we were sent by the schools to go practice shooting for one day, and that was like one day only, and we practiced with the AK-47, and we don't even remember where we were shooting at. We were just shooting it, and then it was like, okay, that's it. That was like a one day kind of a school trip. We went back, and that was it. That was the only time I saw a gun.
It's the best field trip ever.
Like,
Wow. An AK-47?
yeah, so imagine, like, AK-47. I had never seen a pistol in my life.
Oh my
I'd never
God.
seen, like, smaller guns or nothing. Just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like, if we found ourselves like in this desert. It's like a bunch of AK-47 that we're shooting. Like, imagine the person next to me with no practice, nothing, like maybe 4 feet, 5 feet away from me, sitting next to me. Like, imagine how old? Maybe 15 years old. Sitting over there and shooting at something right in front of us. Like, I was thinking, what if this kid next to me just sneezes?
Hey,
I don't know.
am I holding this right? Am I holding this right? Oh, sorry. Wow. Did they at least send a parental consent form home? Like, or was it just surprise to everybody?
That's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm like, what if they just, just the kid next to me just sneezes, and then the gun gets out of his hand and then just shoots others. So we were not thinking of that. We were like, yeah, maybe it's safe. I don't know. Maybe it's not even a real gun. So there was no proper education before we actually go out there on the field. But other than that, I never saw a gun. I never heard about a gun. But one of my friends said that his friend had a gun and he was a criminal. So
now, he was a criminal because he had a gun, or he was a criminal and also had a gun?
no, he just did some nasty things. So he would just go around just rob people, or he would just mock people, or I don't know, just rob cars or trucks. So he had a gun and he was using it in his benefits. So that's the only people, I guess, that have the guns. Or you should be like a maybe high level kind of intelligence member. Member of the intelligence committee or whatever, which is like something about the security, and something similar to CIA, for example, right, or FBI, or the cops, federals, right? Those are the ones that actually have the guns, plus criminals.
So what you're saying is it wasn't legally permissible for citizens to own and carry weapons, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Do you think it would make any difference in Iran if you were an armed citizenry?
Was there any difference, you say, between there and here?
No. How would your country be different if people were allowed to own guns? Do you think it would be different?
Oh, so the way that you're saying is, if people had guns, how it would have been different. So the first thing, as Eric said, having control over what government can do to you, like protecting yourself, the right of protection against what the government might do to you later on, right? You never know what, who's going to turn against you. That actually helps a lot. So one of the reasons that you see right now, Islamic Republic of Iran is still in power. One of the main reasons is that people don't have guns.
Now, I'm not going to get into like speaking for what the people who developed the Islamic Republic of Iran were really after, but that does seem to me logically that that's a by design sort of thing, because it's, while it's easy for a populace to be able to protect themselves if they do have a right to be armed, it seems like if there's not a right to be armed, that the government has much more ease in keeping power, despite whether or not it works for the good of its citizenry. I think that's a pretty clear-cut answer right there, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's correct.
Now I'm going to go look up if Russians own guns, and if Germans owned guns, and if Israelis own guns. And
well, the one thing that people say is that gun confiscation happened somewhere early in the regime that led to the rise of fascism before World War II. And then I'm, not 100% knowledgeable, so fact check me on that if you want, but that's just kind of what happened.
But Eric, I have another question for you. You were saying, based on what I understood about guns, you said that you're against it, but you shouldn't have the right to say somebody else do not carry it. I understand it, like, because that's the law. So people are allowed to have guns. What if you had a say in that law and changing the law to something like, let's say you had the power in you that you could change it, what would you do about it? Because I want to know, like, what would be your suggestion
Hmm.
to all these massive shootings that are happening? What would you think?
I'm the kind of person that believes that I basically err on the side of liberty in just about all things. I just because I personally don't believe that I need to own a gun doesn't mean that I would vote that way and vote for restriction on firearms if it was left to me legislatively, because I just don't think that that's my place. I don't think that humans morally or legally should be able to take away the rights of other humans. Like, if you apply that to any other right, any other inalienable right, let's just use the right of life. If I'm a psychopath and I believe that killing is just fine, that doesn't make it okay to do, right?
True, that's true.
And just because I believe that you shouldn't have the same capability to defend yourself as anybody else who can own the same firearm doesn't mean that that takes away that right of self-defense, right?
That's correct.
And just because I believe that your property would be better for me doesn't give me the right to take that property from you or to vote away that property through legislation, right?
Hmm.
It's the same thing. Like, I would like a Mustang car, but that doesn't mean that I feel like I should be able to legislate myself a free Mustang car, because somebody's going to have to pay for that.
He wants a blue one, by the way, so if you want to donate one, that'd be good.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the budget.
I don't think that I would ever own or carry a gun, but
What I'm thinking is, like, what I'm asking you is this: shouldn't be any kind of restrictions. I'm
What about
talking
mental
about
health?
Yeah,
you know, assault weapons, like
Mhm.
big rifles that you can slaughter, I don't know, 50 people in just 30 seconds.
hmm I'll be completely upfront and honest with you. I think that there definitely need to be restrictions when it comes to like mental health. There needs to be a credible and documented sort of thing before you're able to take away a right from somebody. And even at that point, the the proposed legislation that we're getting into right now is what's called a red flag law. And essentially, if you set off a red flag, and whatever that definition was going to be, you don't necessarily even have to be guilty of a crime or have been found to have been mentally unfit. You can just have that right of self-defense taken away from you. I think that until you actually have something that's documented, until you have something that, until you've committed a crime to forego that right, I don't think that you should have that right of self-defense taken away. Now, there is a very valid question as to whether or not assault rifles are something that are used for self-defense. And once again, this kind of gets down to the core of the Second Amendment issue. Is the Second Amendment about curtailing the right of the government to take away the right of self-defense individually, or curtailing its own ability to oppress its people? And I think that that's what a lot of Second Amendment advocates really get down to, is if let's just say that assault weapons, and as they're defined under most sources, as any semi-automatic weapon, any weapon that automatically refills its chamber in order to fire, basically anything that's not a revolver or a bolt-action rifle, that sort of thing. Very antiquated weapons, let's just say. If those are the only thing that the populace can own, and the government has access to fully automatic assault rifles, not even semi-automatic, that creates essentially the same situation as if the government was allowed to have muskets and the citizens were only allowed to have pitchforks. It creates a definite disparity and creates that room so that citizenry feels like it can't stand up against oppression. So I think if there is a statement to be made in the positive towards, not restricting those types of firearms, it's because that's the reason that they were legislated as rights. The right to be able to preserve one's sovereignty against its government is a cornerstone in our republic.
So are we allowed to own drones, like armed drones?
I
Are
have
we
a
allowed
I
to
have a
own
drone.
tanks?
I have a drone.
No, we don't have an automated firing drone. We could use one of those. Maybe a missile defense shield above our property. Things like that. Are citizens allowed to have those things?
I don't know legally whether that is true. I don't know that drone is used in the Constitution.
Drone is not, as of 2016, there were no laws written in the Code of Federal Regulations regarding drones whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And those laws will take some time to implement. So if you want a drone, go get it. No,
But I guess to answer your question, I feel like in order to have that right taken away, it really has to come down to either the commission of a crime or some credible and documented step, basically saying that you don't have the capacity. Basically, if you have sound mental capacity, you have the right to defend yourself and own whatever means you feel like you need to defend yourself or defend your family or defend a populace from tyrannical government. That's my stance, even if I personally wouldn't choose to be a part of that armed resistance.
So you think the main thing that the government can do would be just having that background check, And what was that red flag thing that you said? It was like, somebody reporting something
It's-
about you. Is it what it is?
That's essentially what it comes down to. Is it, and it's going to vary based off of the verbiage on a federal, state, and county level, that sort of thing. It could be different from locale to locale. But if like a red flag law came into effect that, let's say it's a family member, and let's say that Kristen says, "Oh, Eric has 5 guns, and he's been kind of crazy lately. I think he might be dangerous to himself and others. Someone should take those guns away from him." Now, if I, as the owner of these guns, maybe I am having a hard time, stressed out, going a little crazy, but I haven't committed a crime. Do I have my right to have my property taken away from me?
Yeah, gotcha. Yep.
It's not even rhetorical. Do you think that's right?
What if you did a crime and then
No,
somebody?
I've committed no crime. I haven't been shown to be mentally incapable. Maybe I'm going through some stress. Does the government have the right to take away my property?
I mean, if you're not mentally in a good situation, I think maybe yeah, that'll be safe for others probably.
Maybe, but let's say that there isn't a documented sign of mental illness. It's just like I'm under stress. Maybe people might not necessarily know what it's about. Do I also have let's not even use the property of the gun, but just my right to be able to defend myself if something did happen? Like, does the government have the right to take away my ability to fight off a criminal if I am 5'2" and 100 pounds walking along the street? Because essentially, by taking away that gun, you've taken away what would be close to an equal playing field of me walking down a street and someone else who is 300 pounds just decides that they're going to rob me, and let's say with their fists. So
It's kind of like the Salem witch trials of gun ownership. Really? Like, all you need is the testimony of somebody to say this person is a witch, and then they're hanged.
yeah, and
Like, what if I was the criminal and I was planning to loot your house, and all I had to do was call and report you for having mental instability?
yeah.
Then your guns are taken away, and then I steal everything you have.
Yeah, and I think that an important point is that, Masood, I think what you're saying is you're basically functioning on the assumption that the person who's reporting that is a good actor and that they're reasonable terms, right?
Yeah, it's because you cannot necessarily trust just the public opinion most of the times about somebody, some specific person. I might even prank you and do that.
And it sounds like a joke, but this is something that happened in like live streaming circles where people would be able to find and obtain address information for people who were streaming online, and they would call the SWAT team on them just as a joke. And there have been people that have died due to that, unintended consequences. And I think that that's something really important to consider about red flag laws is the potential for unintended consequences. Because, like, let's say there's a completely reasonable set of restrictions, and it only happens in the most extreme of cases, the only justified cases. But then the law seems to be effective. So it's like, okay, now let's do this based off of broader circumstances. How far is it from some close family member being able to say, hey, this person doesn't seem to be well, I don't think that they should be able to have guns, to someone who's not a direct family member but knows the person and says, oh, I've seen this person, they post all sorts of different things that I think are threatening on Facebook, and they're talking about things in a very violent way. I don't think that they should have guns. Like, that is the point that I think that people worry about, that it's going to become less about what is actually going on in somebody's mental state and becomes a matter of like political affiliation. Like, this person is right wing, and those right wingers, they're dangerous, they're gun nuts. Obviously he's going to do something. Like, that's the problem with the slippery slope.
White supremacists aren't allowed to own guns.
And then it becomes a question of what is really a white supremacist. Masood, are
Yeah.
you a white supremacist?
What's that?
Are you a white supremacist? It's a pretty easy question, Masood.
No. Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Am I a white supremacist? No, I'm not. I'm not white, so no.
That does sound like something a white supremacist would say.
Now, before we move on, I just wanted to tell you something else. Like, what do you think about reducing the number of the bullets that somebody can buy on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis?
Who was that comedian, Masood, that did the bullet? Was it the bullet tax? Oh, that was so funny.
We shouldn't have gun control. We should have bullet control.
Bullet control.
Yeah.
If
so that
it costs you
makes sense. That makes
$1,000 to
sense.
fire a bullet, you're going to think real long and hard before you go and unload 5 in some side of somebody's house or however it went.
But like, what if the government could? So I have another question. So something that actually keeps happening, and the government has no right of just stopping someone because of the suspicion, and it keeps happening and just keeps happening and keeps happening. The scenarios could be very similar, but at the same time, government can do anything about it because whatever they do, they might end up being considered, I don't know, racist or sexist or any other is that you might want to add to that list. What would, so we normally, as Kristen said, right, we as a person, like Kristen herself, like, she looked into some of the characteristics, as she looked at you at first, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think if government does that a little bit, it's just connect the dots of the similar situations, of the very similar scenarios, it's going to be kind of easier to control it, I guess. I don't know.
Was there a question in there, Masood?
Yeah, what do you think of that? Like, is that if I say there is a similarity between two different scenarios that are but very similar, do you think government should have the right to just act on it or at least be suspicious about it?
Are you asking if the government should be able to profile people based off of physical characteristics?
Not necessarily physical, but just some signs, symbols.
Like
Mm.
if somebody was involved in the same cult or something like that.
Yeah, or acting similarly.
Like wears the same hoodie, walks in the same manner, sort of thing.
Yes.
Well, I think that government institutions shouldn't, unless they're like people who are clear, like unless they're terrorist organizations. If just tomorrow some people who walk around with the ISIS flag and ISIS garb decided they're going to open carry assault rifles and do so in a threatening manner, like they're essentially representing a foreign terrorist group, and that essentially is an expression of intention, and that might be a little bit different. But if someone, like, let's just say that someone is walking around and they're wearing, I don't know, let's say a different symbol. Let's say it's the symbol of the Republican Party. Like those are two different scenarios. Wouldn't you agree?
The MAGA hat.
The MAGA hat. Just repeat
What
everything
hat?
my wife says.
I think you bring up a good point, though, Masood, and that's something that they do practice. Looking for people that behave in certain ways when they're trying to like catch a criminal, or if they've received a tip that there's a bomb or someone that's armed. Like there are professionals that will look for certain behaviors to help identify who the threat is. But they can't. Can they really intervene until that person's done something wrong?
I don't think legally they should be allowed to be perfectly honest, because, you know, in a post 9/11 world that we live in, there's just kind of this given that there are going to be a group of people who distrust anybody who is a Muslim or looks like a Muslim or looks like they might look like. Like the problem with that is you're making a lot of assumptions on people who hold a religious belief and trying to boil it down to physical appearance, and those things can't necessarily be true. I think that it's very hard to make a real justification that you can deprive somebody of basic liberties just based off of how they look or even who they affiliate with, as long as the people that they affiliate with are not like known bad actors, I would say. Like, you know, right now, like I don't agree with Antifa, and on the laws right now, I think there are very few states where you can't wear a black hooded sweatshirt and put a mask over your face. And I don't think that people should be able to be arrested just for that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I trust that particular group. Like, I still think that they should be able to have their right to assemble peaceably. They should be able to have their right to speak. And as long as they're not infringing upon the rights to do so of other people, that's okay in my book. However, that doesn't mean that I don't look at them and say, yeah, these people probably do have bad intentions. That's my right as a person to say. So I'm not sure if that kind of answers your question, but that's essentially how I feel about it.
Yeah, but don't you think that if they do something, it's already too late? If you
That's
expect something to happen, if you know it's happening,
well, I
like,
don't think that you can know though. Like, yeah, you can definitely know in retrospect, but I think that leads to a complete opposite of what our criminal justice system is. Our entire foundation of human liberty is that, like, if I'm a police officer and I very strongly suspect, I've been doing this for 20 years. This person right here, they're committing a crime. I'm going to arrest them without probable cause. Like, that's just not how things work here. Like, there has to be probable cause in the eyes of the law. Like, there shouldn't be the right for search and seizure of your property because someone who's in law enforcement has a very strong suspicion. Like, that's just not the kind of state that I want to live in.
Can't they do that though? Can't they search your car? If
No.
you're speeding or if you don't have a license plate and they pull you over, they can search your car.
They can search your car, but they have to, like, only look at areas that they can visibly see. They can't, like, go into locked compartments, that sort of thing. That's what requires something like a warrant. So going into a locked trunk is something that they need to have a warrant. Now, they can develop probable cause to be able to try to obtain a warrant based off of, let's say that they smell drugs, they can call a canine unit. But that's something that based off of the individual actor of a police, whether they're a good actor within an organization or whether they're someone who just wants to get a bust, that sort of thing. But I think that my theory would be consistent, that I don't think that people should be able to have their liberties taken away based off of suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
But the FBI should still be able to protect people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, and their jobs are very difficult. Very, I don't know what goes into all that, but I'm sure, like, if somebody's in a supermarket and they draw a gun, they don't have to pull the trigger before they're tackled by an agent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just taking the gun out with intent to use it in a public place should be enough.
What if we actually have a news story of this if something happens recently? Let's say that they don't take that out, but let's say that in a state there is a law permitting an open carry of a firearm as long as it is not brandished essentially in a way that would imply intent to fire at somebody. Let's say that someone's just walking around and they've got around their shoulder an assault rifle. It's perfectly within the law. Would it be the right of law enforcement to look at somebody and say, I don't like that person, even though they're not doing anything wrong, I'm going to pull my gun on them and essentially take away their liberty? If they're following all the laws, have they done something that justifies having their rights taken away? I would say no.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because here's the thing, is that yes, this could create scenarios where maybe there's a hesitation that can happen, and there's a potential tragedy that could happen. There's always going to be the case that could happen, but the problem is that there are a lot of cases where police take things a step too far. Like, a huge talking point is the idea that there's a disproportionate amount of police brutality and police fatalities on people of color because of the intention of officers, or the suspicion of officers making judgments on people based off of their race. And this is something that I think is a travesty. Now, if they've committed no crime and it's just something that happened on suspicion, I don't think that there's any justification for those people to have their lives taken away, to have their liberty taken away. If they've committed a crime, that's kind of completely different. You give up your rights when you become a criminal. But if you've committed no crime and you have your rights taken away, the person who acts on that, whether they're a citizen or whether they're government law enforcement, they kind of become the criminal at that point because your rights have been taken away from you.
Yeah, it kind of makes it more difficult for the police officers when we have like allowed a weapon, right? So what the officer might think every second they're approaching someone or stopping a car, they might think like any moment a gun might be pulled out and just it might go away. So that kind of makes it more difficult and trickier.
Mm-hmm. And I'm definitely not going to be the kind of person that would say that law enforcement isn't difficult, because it is. Law enforcement is one of the most difficult things that you can get into, but law enforcement isn't supposed to be this, like, it isn't supposed to be a stepping stone into tyranny. And I think that ceding one's right to be able to exist just because they look differently, they can't have the same rights as somebody else, like, that's a discrimination. That's a lapse of that equality of opportunity that I just would not stand for.